There's a nationwide push right now to ban cell phones in schools, and it's gaining momentum. From Los Angeles to Martha's Vineyard, school districts across the country have already enacted cell phone bans. And at the end of January this year, Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell proposed the Study Act to ban cell phones in all Massachusetts public schools. And I think we all know why.
Social media.
Social media.
Oh. Using social media at such a young age is so intense.
An alternative universe that's exciting, addictive, unstable.
They're too young for that.
I think social media is just as powerful as driving a car on freeways and roads.
And unsuitable for adolescents.
You should not give your kids access to social media.
How do you do it?
How do you do it without them hating you?
You know, for as long as I can remember, parents have been concerned about their children's screen time. Decades ago, parents worried about the effect of too much TV. And then it was video games, and then the internet, and social media, and now it's all of the above. But the truth is, anxiety and depression are on the rise, and parents are desperate for solutions. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, has been flying off the shelves, telling parents that they should take phones away and stop coddling their children. But parents I know are all over the spectrum on this issue. Some are panicked and think social media and the internet will rot their children's minds. Some think it's no big deal. And some think it's just another lesson in moderation. Like my buddy Colin, who is a father of two, an 8-year-old boy and a preteen daughter, Hannah, who isn't allowed to have social media or her own phone just yet.
If we find them sneaking the social media or whatever, it's like, it would be pretty casual about it. It'll just depend on the exact circumstances. Is it like an Instagram account where you're like looking at cat videos? Like, who cares? Are you trying to make an OnlyFans account and you're 16? Big problem.
Parents like Colin are watching their children grow up on the digital frontier, a place where we just don't know what the long-term effects of screen time and social media are.
So it's like, I'm worried about it, but at the same time, I'm like, we all drank before we were old enough. We all used drugs before we were old enough. And most of us are fine. Some of us become drug addicts. Some of us become alcoholics.
So what is the Goldilocks amount of screen time kids should get growing up? Somewhere between just enough to prepare them for the world they're about to enter, but not enough to steer them down any dangerous rabbit holes or addictions. So I reached out to an expert.
As an introduction, I am in order of descending importance, a parent, a pediatrician, a child health researcher, and actually a former media maker, a former filmmaker.
Dr. Michael Rich is a doctor and researcher at Boston Children's Hospital, the pediatric hospital for Harvard Medical School. He founded and directs the Digital Wellness Lab and the Clinic for Interactive Media Disorders. His expertise? Kids, their health, and the internet. And he calls himself the Mediatrician. So this week, we're due for a checkup. Not just parents and kids, but all of us. And the doctor's orders might surprise you. I'm Jazmin Aguilera, and this is The Globe. Dr. Rich is a doctor in the traditional sense. Picture a white lab coat and stethoscope. But he's also an expert on this new intersection of medicine between our real physical life and our digital life. At the clinic, he treats kids who struggle with problematic interactive media use, which is fancy medical language for
a loss of control of one's online activities, which we see occurring in 4 distinct manifestations, one being gaming, more prevalent in boys, social media issues, more prevalent in girls, pornography, interestingly, evenly balanced between the kids, but as you might imagine, not something that comes out in their first or second visit. And the 4th manifestation is something we're calling information binging, which is sort of endless Reddit, Quora, or YouTube videos. So we not only take care of sick or injured kids, but we also do a lot of research. The Digital Wellness Lab is part of that effort.
Essentially, Dr. Rich treats patients in the clinic and also directs the lab that researches the effects of what they're suffering from. Too much screen time, social media consumption, things like that. Goodbye chickenpox, hello Roblox.
It's the moment in time where we are realizing, as we also recently did with climate change, that our technologies that have advanced us in so many ways have had unintended consequences. And now people are starting to take seriously those unintended consequences.
So seriously that several schools have adopted cell phone bans. And last year, President Biden's Surgeon General Vivek Murthy even advocated for warning labels on social media platforms.
I think it's great that the Surgeon General made this recommendation. I think it won't work. I think it's great for raising awareness, for saying, America's top doctor is paying attention to this. But from my perspective, both clinically and research-wise, I think we're at a point in time where all media are interactive, all media are social. All the big successes in gaming like Fortnite and Minecraft are not because the game is great, but because it's a place to connect with others and socialize.
Take my friend Colin and his 10-year-old daughter Hannah. She doesn't have social media yet, but she does have an iPad.
What do you do with your iPad?
I watch TV. I play a game called Roblox while calling my friends, so we play together.
What do you like about Roblox?
Well, it's like a whole bunch of different games in one, and it's all free. And like you just can kind of play whatever you want, whenever you want. And you can like friend people, so you can join them when they're playing. And it like says their username. And you can press on them, and if they're playing something, it'll be green, and you press join. It's fun.
Even if Hannah doesn't have social media, her online activity is still social. Like Dr. Rich said, all online media is social. Roblox might be an all-ages game, but it functions as a social platform in some ways. So let's just focus on social media for a second. Even with the strictest definition of what social media is, platforms like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, there are age restrictions to creating a profile. Instagram has introduced a special type of account for teens with added protections. Theoretically, you must be 13 years old to make a social media account.
45% of kids 8 to 12 are on social media, despite the Children's Online Privacy Protective Act, which prohibits it. But there's no enforcement, there's no teeth. The reality is, first of all, that legislation and litigation takes a lot of time, during which time kids are still free range, if you will, in the internet.
Free range sounds great for eggs, but for kids, not so much. Besides the usual online boogeymen, like chat room predators and age-inappropriate content, now kids are at risk for lasting personality-altering damage, radicalization, catfishing, gaming addictions, porn addictions. The list goes on and on and on.
Hannah, are you aware that people are kind of freaked out about kids having phones?
Yeah. I don't really know why, but
If you had to guess.
I guess it's probably that they'll be open to the world too much. And really, you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. What do you think is the age that you'll be old enough to see some more, bigger adult things on the internet?
I think a good age maybe is 14, 15,
Yeah.
13. Yeah.
What do you think, Colin?
I don't know, Faith and my wife and I have talked about it. The unofficial answer is we're going to prolong it as long as we can. Somewhere north of 16, probably. At a certain point, you're just hindering them. What are you sheltering them from at that point, Since we're still have a little bit of time, we're kind of playing it by ear, The iPad has been a stepping stone into the realities of here's your keys to the whole world,
Yeah.
That's the great and scary thing about the internet. Everything is at our fingertips. It's the World Wide Web, after all. But lately, it feels like our information superhighway has become an information traffic jam. We spend hours on it, but we never really go anywhere. And kids, they're raised in that traffic jam, and they see their friends in that traffic jam. It's all they know, and it feels normal. It feels social. It's their third space. The mall down the street is dead, but there are dozens of thriving malls inside Minecraft.
We do have a subset of kids who really don't want to come out of that space. When we were all in a normal clinical situation before COVID, we had probably a 25 to 30% no-show rate on those first visits. When we overnight went to virtual, telehealth, our no-show rate dropped to zero, because this is an environment in which the kids feel comfortable, they feel masterful, they feel in control. And one of the first things I say to the parents after they rant a little bit is, stop being a police officer with your child and start being a supporter of her or his success. For one thing, that allows the kid to sort of relax and realize I'm not the enemy. But interestingly, also the parents relax. The parents are so glad to be off the hook of it. And then I'm able to explore with the young person what her or his pain points are. And sometimes, it'll be my pain points are my parents, but a lot of times it'll also be things like, I wish I had more friends. I'm lonely, or I wish I were doing better in school, or I wish I could sleep better, things like that. And so the actual physical, mental, and social ramifications of this ability to be online all the time, we're able to deal with that, but always in a way that supports the young person's agency, supports their control of this.
Dr. Rich believes we need to work with kids to understand and empathize with them. And this comes from years of researching the effects of technology and screen time on kids and working with them through it. Raising kids in a digital world isn't as simple as an on-off switch. But for the moment, a lot of people still think about screen time in binary terms, that less is good and more is bad.
And, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which is flying off the shelves, basically says we've lost a generation, to smartphones and social media. And I deeply disagree with that.
Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist and pretty squarely mapped onto the screen time is bad for you binary. His latest book, The Anxious Generation, is all about Gen Z and the rise of anxiety and depression. There are a few factors he points to, like overprotective parenting and a decline in free play. But a big one is social media, and that parents should take it away from kids. So I reached out to Jonathan Haidt, and he didn't comment, but he has been making a lot of appearances on TV and podcasts, making his case.
I see people walking all over Brooklyn holding this book. It's talking about the Great Rewiring. Talk to me. What is the Great Rewiring?
So something happened to young people born after 1995. All of a sudden, in the early 2010s, their mental health collapsed. Rates of anxiety and depression skyrocketed. Self-harm is up by like 150% for younger teen girls. Suicide is up 50%. Something happened in the early 2010s. And my argument in the book is the loss of the play-based childhood. It's what anybody over 40 in this audience had. You were out with your friends after school. There was nobody supervising. You had to learn how to work out conflicts, how to face adversity. Then we get Act Two, which is the arrival of the phone-based childhood. And by 2015, now suddenly everyone has a smartphone, front-facing camera, high-speed internet, social media, especially Instagram, on the phone. And almost like someone turned a switch in 2013, girls in America and many other countries suddenly become very anxious, depressed, and self-harming. And so that's what the book is about. Something changed between 2010 and 2020.
I'm not surprised so many people find his case compelling. He does point to a lot of research and data in his book, and it strikes a chord.
Why do you think his book is topping all the bestseller lists? He's talking to Oprah about how social media is so toxic for kids. Mm-hmm. Why do you think he's the go-to person on this topic from a mainstream perspective?
Because most people are seeking a simple answer to a complex and nuanced question. There is not a binary answer for this. And he does not work directly with kids at all. So he's not hearing from them or experiencing what they're experiencing. But he's also cherry picking the data out there that fits his preconceived notions, because that resonates strongly with today's, fear and anger-based kind of dynamic. People are buying it because it is, in a book form, the same echo chamber that they find on social media, right? Which is, Oh yes, see, this supports my problem with my kid staring at her smartphone all the time. Just because something sells a lot of copies doesn't mean it's the truth.
Isn't he onto something though? Like kids' anxiety is off the charts. Like there is a correlation with it and social media. Why shouldn't parents be forcing their kids to have flip phones in the face of all this mounting evidence? How would you explain that correlation and what to do about it?
First of all, as somebody who's been providing health care to adolescents for more than 30 years, I think that what we are seeing is an increase in talking about it, not necessarily an increase in the actual numbers. So this may be an artifact of how we have become more open about and accepting about things like anxiety and depression. Second of all, anxiety and depression are part and parcel with growing up as an adolescent. And the thoughts and behaviors of adolescents in any other stage of life would be pathological, but they are going through something. They are experimenting with sex, with drugs, etc. That doesn't mean they are drug addicts or, sex fiends. That means that they are figuring out life. And so I think that we have to take a step back and say, how much of this is real and how much of this is just different perspectives?
We need our own media literacy on it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, that is not to say that social media and smartphones don't contribute to an amplification and acceleration of some of these issues. What used to be written in a diary and locked in the bedside stand is now put up on a billboard for anyone to see and to be there when they apply to college or apply for a job or whatever. So I think that there are real issues that he brings up. Another real issue that he brings up is the decline in free play that I think is actual and is real. And some of that is driven by parental fear also. Go out in the yard and don't come back till dinner. They're saying, oh, it's dangerous out there in the backyard. I'm going to take you from school to after school program to dance class to soccer practice. Then you're going to do homework and go to bed. And it's all adult directed play rather than kids figuring out life. There are sort of generalizations that I think he's absolutely right on and the evidence supports. And then there are things like no smartphones until 14 and no social media until 16, which are completely arbitrary numbers, not supported by the data.
Yeah.
Although Dr. Rich agrees with a lot of Jonathan Haidt's observations, concluding that smartphones and social media are the root of the problem is an oversimplification. And to Dr. Rich's mind, there's a better, more nuanced way to think about it.
You've got to stop talking about internet safety because that starts from the presumption that the internet is unsafe. We should be talking about internet mastery with young people and actually with all of us, because this is an environment that we all need to function in. It's not that kids or any of us use social media or smartphones. It's how we use them. Right. And when it is a default activity, like we get on an elevator and we got to pull our phone out, we get on a bus, we pull our phone out, instead of looking at people around, starting a conversation. One of the things that I really have noticed, even in the immediate environs of Boston Children's Hospital, where theoretically everybody's focused on kids' well-being, I used to be able to smile at strangers on the street, but now it seems creepy to people. Right? Because they've all got their AirPods in, right? They're all in some other place. And who is this old guy smiling at me? What a creep. And that's really sad in a way that we've lost our ability to connect with strangers and who are part of our community. And so I actually see smartphones and social media as being more of a divider than a connector. When you see kids in the playground all staring at their smartphones, leaning against the wall instead of playing with each other, we've done something wrong here.
So, On the one hand, Dr. Rich thinks we shouldn't be focusing so much on how dangerous the internet can be, because then you set yourself up for a defensive position, always in opposition to a force that isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But on the other hand, over-consuming social media and defaulting to screen time is affecting how we interact with each other, and that interaction is really important for child development. And faced with these two seemingly opposing ideas, Dr. Rich has a solution: internet mastery. That's after the break.
I'm Brendan McCarthy, the Globe's Spotlight editor. Spotlight is the longest-running investigative team in the United States. We're perhaps best known for the investigation into sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, but that is just one of many important investigations over the years. The team has also uncovered stories about the FBI's special relationship with notorious gangster Whitey Bulger and the untimely death of New England Patriots star Aaron Hernandez. It takes a lot of time to do investigative work like this. And if you believe in local journalism and holding power to account, please consider subscribing to the Boston Globe. There's a link in the show notes.
Welcome back, just in time to master the internet. Are you ready? Dr. Rich wants us all to think differently about technology. He thinks we should change our thinking away from a restrictive mindset that all online activity is bad and should be kept to a minimum, and instead shift to an adaptive mindset that learning the best way to incorporate screens into daily life will optimize life. Internet mastery, like having a black belt in scrolling habits. But still, it takes a long time to earn a black belt. So we return to the premise. What about kids? Would a kid care if their parent said, "You can't have screen time until you've mastered it"? What does that mean? How does a parent like Colin get away from the concept of mastery to tangible parenting?
Do you and Faith have like a plan, or is it kind of holding the line for now and then at some point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding the line for now and then like kind of just evaluating as time goes on. It's not going to be like a driver's license. Obviously, she's showing like a certain level of maturity with the freedom we've given her. Obviously, everyone sneaks stuff. We know that. I'm sure that's happening to some extent, but whatever she's been sneaking hasn't manifested itself negatively in like our regular day to day. Like we haven't caught it. So it's kind of like, well, whatever amount you're sneaking, you're probably doing it the right amount, you know? So I say that now, that whole philosophy could change in a month or in a day or in a week, you know?
Yeah.
With YouTube now, it's like, I realize she's getting to it. So I'd rather have some control over it. You know, like her settings aren't for her age. They're a bit above, you know? So it's like, I'm trying to be reasonable about it, but also have a control over it, you know? Because if she's going to get it without me monitoring it or like knowing.
It seems like it's not a fight.
So far.
Oh, that's good.
So far, she's, you know, what is she, 10? I think she's never scrolled. You know what I mean? I feel like, not to be like kind of crass about it, but it's like, you don't know what cigarettes are until you have one. And then you have one. You know what I mean? Like, and then you have one and you're like, not only is it cool, like I'm getting high, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, so I think there's a bit of that where it's like mystery. It's like, who knows? You know, the algorithm hasn't like leached into the brain yet.
What Dr. Rich is trying to do for parents like Colin is to change how we think about screens and social media entirely. It's not like cigarettes. It's not a vice. It's not healthy versus unhealthy, screen versus no screen. It's more complicated than that.
What I'm hoping is that we will move from what's been essentially a stalemated position for decades, starting with television, frankly, where it was believed for some reason that you either could be for screens or for kids, but not for both.
But there is a way to be for screens and for kids. And it starts with media literacy.
Well, I'll tell you what people ask me is, when should we start teaching our kids media literacy? And I say the moment they start using media. And I define media broadly as any means of transmitting information between humans. So in a sense, when we put our infant or toddler in our lap and start reading a board book and making the moo sound when we see a cow, or that is using media but it's also teaching media literacy, right? It's teaching the child that that image on a page is a symbol for an animal named a cow that says moo. So we need to start doing that right at the beginning of when they use screen media also. And that's, I think, where we fall off the wagon a little bit. We'll seek out good stuff like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers or whatever, but then we will park the kids in front of it and go about our business without continuing that process of helping them, first of all, decode that two-dimensional image on screen and the sound into human interaction, and to really help them understand that this is one perspective of which there may be many. So to help them right from the beginning be questioning reality, questioning authority. Movies today are 50% CG. And what's interesting is the kids are sophisticated about it. And so they'll see this massive battle scene in Lord of the Rings or something, and they will know that there were not many, if any, people involved in creating that scene. We're raising a very sophisticated set of viewers that are not necessarily literate in the sense of really digging down deeply. They know the techniques, they know the technologies, but they don't necessarily think through the whys and wherefores of that.
That's a really interesting distinction, that in one way, a kid could know that something was a deep fake or know that something was AI and how it could be manipulated to look like a thing, but then would stop there, wouldn't continue to think, oh, this is propaganda.
Mm-hmm. In part, that is because we expect children with their developing brains to respond like an adult with a fully developed brain. They've not achieved that level of neurodevelopment that says, should I question reality a little bit? Should I be a little skeptical about this? We don't fully develop our prefrontal cortex, our impulse control, our future thinking, our cause and effect, all of that sort of air traffic control of our brain until our mid to late 20s.
Wow.
And there are arguments that some of us never develop it all the way anyway, ever. But you know what I'm saying? That we have to also keep in perspective human neurodevelopment and what they are capable of. The 17-year-old wraps the family car around a tree and dad screams, "Don't you have a brain?" The correct answer is not that part.
I'm in my mid-30s, so my brain is fully developed. But I have noticed in myself that itch to grab my phone and scroll even when someone is right in front of me, willing and able to have a real-life conversation, just so I can read other conversations in text online. It's nutty, but it makes me feel safer, a place I can interact while lurking, the Diet Coke of conversation. And I feel guilty about it too. Every week, Apple sends me a screen time report, and I flinch at the amount of time I waste. I try to set restrictions and keep an eye on it at least, but then it happens again, like clockwork. That weekly guilt trip.
I think screen time limits never worked, even with television, and they can't work now because we can't even measure screen time. I mean, if I asked you right now, how much time were you on a screen yesterday? You wouldn't know, not because you weren't paying attention, but because we move seamlessly in and out of the digital and the physical, with our smartphones, with our smartwatches. And so one of the approaches that I take, besides telling them not to be fearful of the internet, is to have dedicated non-screen time every day, because that's much easier to control.
This approach makes sense when you consider the stats. Here's an example from the 2022 survey conducted by the Digital Wellness Lab. They surveyed a little bit more than 1,400 kids between 12 and 17 about their screen habits. There were kids who had no restrictions on screen time at all, and kids that did, to varying degrees. The kids that did have restrictions were mostly content-based. You can't watch R-rated movies online, no porn websites, that kind of thing. only 35% of kids had overall time restrictions, like 2 hours of screen time a day kind of rules. Another surprising response from the survey is that the majority of the kids were okay with their restrictions, about 54% of them approximately. Only 34% found their restrictions to be too severe. So maybe it's not about restrictions at all, and more about priorities. Carrot, not stick parenting. Instead of restrictions on how much time a kid spends rotting on the couch scrolling through their phone, sign your kid up for jiu-jitsu and local theater. Make space for activities.
You know, what's great about it is obviously it means you pay more attention to things like books, right? And each other and Mother Nature. One of the things that I recall so strongly is I came out of the hospital at the end of one day, just exhausted from this sort of angst that I'd been wading through all day. And I turned westward to where my car was parked, and I saw a brilliant sunset. And it's like all my cares fell away. All of that exhaustion fell away. I was rejuvenated by it. And then I looked at everybody else on the street. They were all doing this, looking at their screens, and they missed it. And so I think it's really important that we consciously get back in touch with each other, with the earth, and recognize that in many cases we have sacrificed deep and sustaining and meaningful connectedness for near infinite connectivity, which is not the same thing. And yet we expect the same kind of sustaining friendships, if you will, online as we have IRL. I think we lost a lot when friend became a verb. And we sort of piled up friends as if they were a scorecard rather than seeking out the kind of friend who's there for you at 3 a.m. when things are rough.
This all sounds so lovely and soul-affirming, but I can't imagine making this case to a teenager. I mean, back in my day, when the coolest gadget was a razor phone, teachers were still having a hard time getting kids to put their phones away. And that's when we were all texting using T9. But I was a lucky one. I'm old enough to have had a childhood without a smartphone.
Hannah, when I look back at my childhood, I'm so glad that my childhood didn't have that in it. When you hear that, does that make you curious about what cell phones and access to the internet does?
Sometimes, I don't think about it that much, but sometimes I do. I'm like, why?
You're curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you had to guess why.
Well, because they didn't get to, instead of just being on a phone all the time, they got to do more stuff and be outside more and just hang out with more people.
Do you know anyone, either their older brother or a sister or somebody that's just seems like they spend too much time on their phone?
Honestly, me. I'm on my iPad too much.
So there's the rub. Younger people with less developed prefrontal cortexes may not grasp the importance of watching a sunset or taking time to make friends slowly and in person. But they can grasp the importance of joining their friends on Minecraft. It's not that kids these days are particularly antisocial. It's that their social life is online. A lot of their life is online. They're growing up in a different world than their parents. And parents need to recognize that they too need to learn internet mastery.
I ask kids in my clinic when their parents are out of the room, I say, what could your parents do better? And almost always the first thing out of their mouth is pay more attention to me. Think about it, and the parents are sort of saying, I don't know, she's staring at her smartphone all the time. She never says anything. Maybe we need to be more proactive at parenting, recognize that parent is more importantly a verb than a noun, and do it in the digital space they're in as well. So one of the things I recommend is what I call the 3+2 M's. Model the behavior with screens that you want to see in your kids, because they hear 1% of what we say and 100% of what we do. Mentor them in the use of these devices when they get them. So sit down next to them and explore the smartphone together. The reason I use the term mentor rather than teacher is that mentors learn as much from their mentees as the mentees learn from the mentor, and it breaks up the resistance parents have to entering this space because they are used to being the great expert on everything and they feel like the kid is the expert here. Fine, go with it. You're coming from a different place. It opens the door to discussion, conversation, and it makes you not a police officer, but a supporter of their success. The third M, which parents and kids push back against the most, is monitor their online behavior. That doesn't mean you have to be with your child all the time she or he is in it. What it means is that you need to have their usernames and passwords so you can monitor it. Because you can monitor it, their behavior changes. It's sort of like random drug testing in the workplace, right? So those are the three, model, mentor, monitor. And then there are two more M's that are the goodies you get. The first one being mastery of this environment, of these tools, using them to extend ourselves, extend our humanity, extend our intelligence. And the fifth one, which is the best of all, is make memories. We don't remember what we do on screen. I'll remember you, Jazmin, don't worry. No, no, but you know what I mean? What we do on screen is quite ephemeral and doesn't sort of have these kind of anchors in memory the way going camping with your family does, or, playing catch in the backyard, or trying to cook spaghetti and making a mess of the kitchen. Those are the things that we remember. Those are the things that bind us together and bind us to the past, which we can learn from. So I think we've got to step away from seeking a binary answer to a complex and nuanced question. I'm patient coming in 3 minutes. So
yeah, no, thank you so much. I very much appreciated this.
If you'd like to hear more about the Digital Wellness Lab, check it out at digitalwellness.org. And check out Dr. Rich's book, The Mediatrician's Guide, a joyful approach to raising healthy, smart, kind kids in a screen-saturated world. If you enjoyed this episode and learned something, please share it with a parent you love. There will also be a print version of this episode on globe.com. Check out the show notes for links. This episode was produced and sound designed by me, edited by Kristen Nelson.